Welcome back, folks. I'm Frizz, and today we're going to be talking about the rarity system in Pathfinder 2e, and why you should care about it, and why it's implemented so amazingly. For those not in the know, every single item, feat, spell, and monster in the whole game has a rarity associated with it. Rarity comes in 4 different types of varieties: common, uncommon, rare, and unique. Let's just jump right into things, why don't we? The different types of rarity are rather simple when it comes down to it. If something is common, then that means that it's, well, common. If it's a feat, that means that pretty much anyone who can take it without any issues. It's something that you can find pretty much anywhere or just figure out on your own. If something is uncommon though, then that means it's a little bit harder to find or get access to. Uncommon items or feats are generally only available to people who have special training or are from a specific location or culture. Just as an example, in the normal Inner Seas region of Golarion that almost all the APs take place in, katanas are uncommon, because those are, from an entirely different continent on the other side of the globe. So you're not going to be all that likely to find them, but you can find people who can sell them if you look hard enough. Generally speaking, you can probably get access to uncommon feats and abilities and items if they make sense for your backstory, and generally, uncommon items are not going to be all that much more powerful than common ones. They're just a little bit weird, or maybe a bit specific, or just, pretty niche. But you can probably get access to them with a bit of work. Rare items, or pretty much anything that is rare, is a little bit different though, as they are all but impossible to find. Generally speaking, the only way to get a rare item or ability is if your feat gives it to you explicitly, considering how hard they are to get. Just as an example, guns in Golarion are not rare, they are uncommon. Something like an android, so a literal robot person, or an automaton, which is literally a robot, that is rare. You are incredibly unlikely to run across them, so just keep in mind that rare options are probably not going to be all that easy to get your hands on. Finally, you have the unique rarity, which is obviously just means that whatever has it is truly one of a kind. You are almost certainly not going to be able to pick a unique character option because it's unique. Now that we've covered that though, let's talk about why this system is actually any good. Essentially, having a standardized system for rarity really helps GMs out who want to limit exactly what is allowed in their game. Having a standardized system makes things a lot easier. If you're trying to run a bit more of a standard fantasy sort of game without any of the crazy options that are allowed in Pathfinder, being able to say that certain options are uncommon can help that fantasy come to life. If, let's just say as an example, you want to run a more just focused on Western fantasy. So you say, okay, yeah, you can't play Kitsune because those are uncommon. And it also helps fulfill the fantasy type of story that you want to play. It's always kind of funny to me whenever a group of PCs come together for a campaign and they're all from these different scattered ancestries and cultures from all around the globe. They're all hyper specific and just so happen to help out their build. And that can be fun and all, but that's not going to work in every single type of game. For some games, that's amazing, while in others, that party being a complete group of weirdos can get a bit in the way of the story. Rarity can help regulate those kinds of situations. Another important element of rarity that can really help out GMs is that certain abilities and spells are uncommon by default, meaning that a GM can always just say no to having them in their game if they would be problematic for the story. A perfect example of this is how long-range teleportation is always uncommon now, which can make a GM's life substantially easier. While having teleportation magic is super cool, I'm mostly a PC, I love having teleport, it can also be a bit of a pain in the ass for the GM. The party being able to cast a single spell and then end up in any major city on the damn continent can be a little bit inconvenient for GMs who like to prepare everything in advance. So being able to just say no to teleport can really make the GM's life easier, and let's be honest here, most GMs could really do with an easier time. Now, another thing just to point out is that some spells that can just get in the way of story are generally going to be uncommon. A good example of this is how Zone of Truth is by default uncommon. Zone of Truth is the bane of every intrigue campaign, because if you think someone's lying, why don't you just have your cleric prepare Zone of Truth to ensure that they aren't lying? It can be it's an annoying spell to build a story around. So being able to say, oh yeah, it's just uncommon, you have to try and figure out who's lying and who's telling the truth yourself, can really make things a bit more interesting. The final use of Rarity that I absolutely love to death is that it can really make for some interesting side quests. Let's take teleport as an example, as I've previously used it. If your party really wants to teleport, or they need it to do a specific task, but they can't just learn it, then discovering how to cast it can make for a more interesting mission. So let's say that they need to teleport to this other island that they can't get to using mundane travel. They can't get teleport automatically, so now they have to, say, sneak into an arcane library to find texts on teleportation theory, to then allow their wizard to be able to learn teleport, or maybe they have to do a wizard a favor just to be able to copy teleport out of that wizard's spellbook. Either way, that is an infinitely more interesting option and story than just buying a scroll of teleport from a store and learning it that way. Rarity can help set up for all different kinds of interesting situations like those, and as long as you're willing to go out of your way to interact with the system just the tiniest bit, it can really help you out with ideas for your game. What this ultimately comes down to is that Rarity is one of those bits of invisible game design in Pathfinder 2e that works great and nobody ever notices, which is probably by design. If something like this in a game is working as intended, you probably don't notice that it's even there. For anyone who is watching this who plays other types of game systems or editions, I recommend implementing something similar, or making certain elements of the game a bit more scarce. I personally find that adding some restrictions on PC options and items and just customization makes for more interesting choices that people have to make, and Rarity is a nice and simple way of doing that. Really, I just like Rarity and I wanted to talk about it. Thanks for watching. Apparently, short videos on small elements of game design in Pathfinder 2e is just what this channel is now, which is interesting. I wasn't expecting this channel to develop like this. Regardless, what do you feel about Rarity? Different tables that I'm a part of treat it very differently, and it's interesting to see how much or how little of an impact that it has in different campaigns. I'm honestly curious about your experiences with Rarity in your games. Regardless, until I see you next, live a wonderful life.